Welcome to the People I Know, philosophical podcast with and about the diverse people I've met over the years as an African-American female philosopher, dancer, teacher, lover of life, and all kinds of other things. Today's guest is philosopher, mother, and talented communicator, Candace Turbyville-Erickson. Enjoy. I just want to start with a land acknowledgement. We pay our respect to the elders, both past and present, of the Kiikaapoi, Peoria, Kaskaskia, Myaamia, Hualapai, and Mojave lands on which we live and do this work. That represents the lands that you are on and the lands that I am out here on. Wonderful. And welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, so we met at San Francisco State in the philosophy master's program. So that's how we know each other. I think the class I remember most with you was Asta's social ontology class.
Yes.
Yeah. And I don't remember the context of this or like what happened, but I remember you made a comment about pornography and I'm like, oh, that's a good point. Like for some reason, like this is just the thing that sticks in my head.
Oh, wow.
About it's very bizarre too, because a lot of that time for me is a little bit blurry and I'm not sure if that was like alcohol at the time or like what was going on there. But like that's one joy memory that I have. It was really good. So so I have a master's degree in philosophy. I lead a like customer operations team at a Fortune 500 company, which only means it's a big corporation, so we have to follow a lot of rules. But yeah, I'm a mother to two kids, a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. And then I am married to my partner, Andrew. So that's what I got going on right now. And my dog too.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's, I'm glad you remembered what class we were in together. Because yeah, a blur. It's like, I look at my books, I'm like, okay, yeah, I remember kind of general ideas and I remember faces and people and like, especially just when I remember you in my head, when I see you in my head, you're smiling, even if you're saying something really like, I don't believe that. And this is why I don't believe that.
Yeah, that hasn't boded too well for me in the corporate world because it's like, why are you smiling when you say that?
Oh, God.
Just like, this is just my face.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Ooh, grad school is a blur. So this is the 4th season of the podcast, 4th chapter. And of course, it is the white women I know. So thank you for being a white woman. Or thank you for
easier than most things, I think.
Oh my gosh. So that's what I want to get into first. Of course, this is a philosophical podcast and I find that stuff to be much more important, but hey, USA 2021. So let's get into identity. First question is, why and when does your whiteness matter? Or when do you notice it? When does it come up for you? And then when does it not matter?
So I think it both matters a lot and not at all, because that's part of the privilege piece, right? Like I get to pick and choose when my whiteness matters in a situation. So for me, identifying as a white female, usually the female part comes before the white part for me. Because it's like, all right, I got to navigate this situation a little bit differently because I'm a woman. And since white is, the default or something like that, especially in Northwest Ohio where I am, it's not as front and center in a lot of my interactions. But it does matter a lot when I have the opportunity to act in solidarity with a non-white person when we're in the same situation. So again, that's kind of a minority of the time for me just because of where I live. It's predominantly white. I don't have the statistics or anything, but the times that whiteness matters is when I'm in the minority, I think, for me. So I grew up in a mostly Latinx community, right? So agricultural Southern California. So it mattered when I was growing up in a very different way, right? My parents were very much like, you know, we got to take care of our white people in the community. It was like an odd, because we were in the minority. So it was like this odd kind of solidarity there, which I now realize was racism. You know, love my parents and you know, they've helped me learn a lot of things, but you know, you look back and you're like, oh, that was not appropriate. But then I think too about my whiteness when we moved from San Francisco to Ohio. It was like, there are a lot of white people here. Like you could go somewhere and there would be no people of color. And that was very jarring. So I think for me, it's part reminding myself that not everywhere is like where you are currently. I remember, so there's a documentary called, what is it called now? Valentine Road. The junior high that I went to, there was a school shooting, like a very pointed one, not while I was there, but probably 10 years after, where a white student shot a mixed race, what I would call gender non-conforming student. I don't know that he was transgender, but shot him in the computer lab. And they do interviews with, you know, kids who went to the school at the time. And the shooter's girlfriend said, like, there just aren't many white people anymore. And like, that just stuck out to me because like, that was the mentality that so many of the white students in that community, like going to those schools had. But then I'm like, I'm in Ohio, I'm surrounded by almost nothing but white people. So it's just like, the more you get out and the more you experience the world, I think like your race matters in different ways. So.
There's so much to unpack with that. But backing up just a little bit. So did you, I guess my question is, when or how did you start to really understand that how you were growing up with your family wanting to focus on your community, which makes sense. I mean, that's just what, you know, many families do, was actually really problematic? Was it because the move into like San Francisco, which is like all kinds of multiculti, or even later on, like really being dumped in this pool of whiteness in Midwest America?
Yeah, so I think for me, it was before I moved away to do my undergrad. So I did my undergrad at Humboldt State in like way Northern California. Also predominantly white community, right? But I took a race, racism, and philosophy class there. And that was kind of like the actual putting together of all these kind of inklings that I've been having recently. But I went to community college in Oxnard, California, in Southern California. And I took my first philosophy classes there. It was actually an English class I took where we were reading The Cherry Orchard. I think that's what it's called. Anyway, I'll send you a note on it, but it talks about immigrant communities that would come in and pick cherries every other season and things like that. So there was a lot of talk about migrant communities, and since we were living in one, it was a hot topic of discussion. And there was a protest. I can't remember what it was for. Again, there's my privilege. I didn't have to know what it was for. And several students wanted to attend, and my English teacher was like, look, you can attend, like I encourage you to attend, but like you will be marked absent for today in class. So it wasn't like you get to have both, like you get to choose, are you going to participate in class or not? Like that's all these points are just participation points. So like clearly there should be more important things than that, right? But there was a lot of conversation about, you know, was he was a white professor, like was he stifling the Latinx students from participating by dinging points for not being there that day? And so most of the students left, and he was good with that. And I stayed after, and I remember crying like in front of my professor. I was like 16 or something, so there's that too. But I remember crying because like my dad, I felt, had lost out on job opportunities. He's in the construction business. And I felt like everything he had been telling me at home, it was like proving that he had lost out on jobs to people who had immigrated from Mexico and other Latin countries. And my teacher just looked at me and shook his head. He was like, okay, we need to have a conversation right now, because this is like something's happening here. Yeah. And so again, it's just that exposure to, like, he used to live in New York, then he moved to California. It's just those exposures to different people who have different experiences than you, and being open to hearing them is the biggest thing, right? Don't just shut people down because they have a different experience than you. But that was kind of the first time that I realized, okay, this is not what, you know, as a parent or as a community we should be telling our children. I think that was kind of and it was like a pretty jarring wake up call too. So it was a pivotal moment for me.
I'll get around to my question. So I've done one recording, one interview, and it was absolutely great with one of my friends, and she's a professor of African history and stuff, white woman, and so of course she's got all kinds of things that she's got to work with. And I was explaining that, you know, with doing my Black History Month chapter, you know, it's really coming. I mean, as Black as I am, I can't stop being Black. I'm a brown person. Like, you know, this is something, my identity is something that changes from day to day, from year to year. I grow into seasons, come out of stuff. But talking with other Black and brown people, it's like, oh, well, we have so much time socially, culturally, to reflect on our identity, to reflect on the people who've come before us and have done things. And we take those histories, those actions, all those experiences, and kind of like piecemeal buffet style, like make them part of ourselves. And that's, you know, that's pride. And so initially I was thinking, well, why don't white people do that? Why isn't that a white thing? Like, okay, yeah, Christopher Columbus sucked, but like, he's still one of your guys. Like, he's still a white person. Like, you don't get to say he wasn't white, you know? It's like, isn't that something that is available and open to you? So I won't go into what her response was, but she definitely went in one direction with it that got me thinking all kinds of other things. But it is something that she's considered. And so I wonder, you know, I pose this to you, just like, how do you see this as far as your identity goes in relation to other white people that are currently alive? And then, you know, before you, how do you inform your identity with kind of white pride?
Yeah. So I think I mentioned when we were talking kind of with our master's cohort about the book, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? And the part for me as a white person reading that book was the practice of not defining yourself or defining your identity as inferior or superior to anyone else. And like, I have a mix of those, right? Because as a female, I often see all the can'ts, right? I can't do this because I'm female, XYZ. But as a white person, I don't actively feel superior, but I know that's the social environment that I'm living in. So I'm super interested in identity, but it wasn't until, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 years ago that I really started seeing myself as a white person. Cause I think that's the first part, you know, it's not this colorblind type situation. And like, how, granted, I'm a white person, I know that about myself. What does that mean about my hopes for the future, for how white people will behave in our society and what kind of rules we'll have and things like that. And then how I think about white people who came before me. Some of them have done really terrible, horrible things. And how do I relate that to where I am right now? Because I'm not naive enough anymore to think that like the terrible things that my white ancestors did have no bearing on me as a person today, right? Because they absolutely do. So that was like not a very good answer to your question, but I think, I think for me, a lot of it is like that first, like identifying myself as a white person and not just like the default, right? I don't have to think about it because I'm white. And I see so many instances now. And like, I think frankly, I'm not that fun of a person to be around. One, because I've stopped drinking, but two, because I'm just like always pointing at the things. And like, I can tell my husband gets tired of it. And like people around me are like, okay, yeah. But yeah, I think part of it is being willing to not be complacent or culpable anymore.
Yeah. Not be complacent, not be culpable. Yeah. My final-ish specific question on this topic, which is why I wrote down entitlement of space-time.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Yeah. So I'm in this teacher training. This is in all of this pandemic, you know, because I'm out here off grid. I haven't had to deal with a lot of things. Like I lost my job. And so most of the things that I've been doing have been really voluntary. Most of that stuff has been outside yard work. So I haven't had to deal with a lot of Zooming, but I've engaged in a lot of training lately. And that means that I'm Zooming with people all over the world. And oh my gosh. And so I realized that I'm in this group, this training with the majority of the participants are women and white women. And so just scrolling through the faces, like, okay, you know, whatever. And then as more people get comfortable, more people talk more. And I noticed this really strange thing happening where these white women are talking with the instructor as though it is, you know, they're waiting after class and they're talking to the instructor, asking questions, except there's 100+ people on this Zoom, just as though there was like 30 people in the classroom and there's a line of people also waiting to speak with the instructor. And so what this brought up in me is this realization that like, this is one of these characteristics of like, someone being like a Karen, of this entitlement of I'm going to take up this space and I'm going to take up this person's time because I want it, versus a humility of understanding that there are other people who want to take up some space and need to take up some time with questions that are just as relevant. And so I guess my question is, it's two questions. One, is this something that you notice as a white woman? And then two, you know, I don't have to speak specifically like about your kids, but like as a parent raising white kids, how are you moving forward with this kind of piece of identity and an entitlement?
Yeah, so it is something I notice because I do it. And I would like to think, that in a group that size, you kind of read the room and you understand, look, I'm not the only person here who has a question. And in those situations, I'm much more likely to back down. I'll be like, I'll send an email later or something like that. So part of it is my question important enough to take up someone's time? And I think that's just like a me and my lack of confidence kind of thing going on. So it may not be a white woman thing. It may be more of a, you know, like I said before, that imposter syndrome kind of thing. I'm like, this question isn't important. Don't worry about it. But in my work meetings, I am very vocal. It's predominantly men, right? So I don't feel as bad speaking up more frequently. I was in a conversation about implicit bias, specifically around gender bias. And this one upper level leadership man said, but why do women talk so much? And I'm like, this is a safe space. He's supposed to ask what he wants to ask, right? But I was like, I don't like that guy. But then I realized, like, I take up a lot of time in meetings talking. And is that because I'm like, I'm going to have a voice here, damn it. And like, I'm holding that space for myself because I feel like somehow I need to, otherwise people wouldn't afford it to me. I think in the more Karen moments where it's like, I don't really care that there's a line of people behind me. I'm important. You know, I'm going to take up that space and time.
Yeah.
I think I do see that, but it's very context specific for me anyway, in the ways that I see it.
Yeah, like in the
I'm
grocery
curious.
store.
Yeah.
Holding up the line, having a conversation about the crackers or what brand is better.
Yeah. And I think for me, so I have a friend who his way of like being trying to empathize with people is always like, if someone's driving really fast or erratically, I just always think like that person has to poop really bad. Like that's his mindset. He's like, I just think they have some sort of emergency situation that they need to go the speed they're going. And so sometimes like that person who's talking to the checker at Target about the crackers that they picked out, I'm like, maybe that person's lonely and just needs a chat. But really it's just like, they don't give a shit about the people behind them. That's probably what it is. Yeah.
No, I mean, and that brings up a really good point of first of all, you know, being more compassionate and trying to understand positions of other people, being more empathetic. But I guess in the same vein of your coworker, specifically male coworker, first thing that popped into my head is like, well, men talk a lot too, like a whole lot. I mean, just a whole lot, but with, I feel like saying less, but it might be the same thing. Like they just repeat themselves, like they mansplain to each other. This isn't gender specific. Like it's just their MO.
Right.
But yeah, absolutely. There could be other stuff going on, and it is helpful for us to read the room, to understand kind of our place, our context. And it's an ongoing process.
Yeah. The question with my kids though is a good one. So my 4-year-old is a boy. His name's Everett, although he asks me if he's a boy or a girl fairly frequently. I'm like, what do you feel like? You know, like, I don't know. He asks me if he can be a girl when he grows up, and I tell him, sure. So he's asking these questions a lot, probably because I don't like shut out those types of conversations. So he asks me every now and again, and that's how that is. So I say he's a boy now because we'll see what happens. But he was born male, I guess I should say. And then my daughter is born female, and she's 2 years younger. So there's a lot of difference in physical capability, right? There are things my son can do, like climb trees, that my daughter's just not ready to do. And so when I think about, you know, him, my son, being aware of my daughter and making sure that, you know, she gets to ask me questions too. And just because he was talking first doesn't really mean anything. He doesn't get to talk for 5 minutes straight and interrupt her when she has a question. So that happens pretty frequently. But for my daughter, I think it goes back to that, like, trying not to instill in her that she's inferior in some way, especially because there are a lot of like boy girl comparisons that other people are doing that like I don't have control over when they leave the house, right? When they go to daycare, or when they go to swim class or something like that. So what I'm thinking of is like, how do I avoid my daughter becoming a Karen, right? And I don't know if that was your question.
It's part of it, yeah.
Yeah, but I'm thinking like, how do I make sure that she sees other people as important and their time is valuable? And I think that stems from like a very base level understanding that every human you interact with is important, and everyone's time is important. And just because you want to talk to someone for 20 minutes doesn't mean that the person behind you doesn't want to, or something like that. So I think it probably comes from some sort of basic, like, seeing other people's humanity, right? And sometimes assuming they have the same interest you do. And maybe you all talk about it rather than just one person at a time going through asking questions. It's more of like a group discussion or something like that. Now I'm getting into problem solving mode. But I think I think like laying the groundwork for how you see differences in people and noting those differences as an opportunity for connection. It's not an opportunity to treat that person differently than someone who looks the same as you or talks the same as you or has, you know, similar experiences or something like that.
I like that. Well, it's fine to move into problem solving mode because the next question is about critical thinking and philosophy. And how are these relevant for you professionally or personally, and personally? And you can choose one or the other or both. I mean, this is kind of, you know, part of your foundation. So
yeah.
How do you see this in the world?
I see a lack of it. Yeah. I think watch Sill's episode for, you know, a real in-depth conversation of that one. I think it was so well done. Such a good conversation. So I won't kind of belabor those points. But for me at work, it's a lot of what's required of people who report to me is like what you would think of basic critical thinking and problem solving, like create a plan for yourself. What's the first step? What's the second step? What's going to be the outcome? So like just seeing critical thinking kind of everywhere and then knowing when it's not existent in a certain area or a certain person is a weird conversation to have. Pretty soon here, I'm going to have to let someone go on my team because they just don't have that aspect that we really need to have. And so part of me is like, do I have this broader conversation with him about why this is important in all aspects of your life, right? This isn't just a go to work and do this thing. It's like something you have to practice and work hard at, and don't think that it's going to come easy to you because somewhere along like your education, it hasn't happened for you. And why is that? And investigate that. Is it something you were missing, or something, you know, or things that people just thought it wasn't important for you to know? I don't know.
Or you don't think it's important for you to know. It's gotten this far.
Yeah, I hope it's not that one. I really hope it's not. But yeah, it is for a lot of people. So in work, it's kind of a all day, everyday thing. And I think one of the things that enabled me to do the job that I do, the one that I get paid for anyway, is having like quote unquote good critical thinking skills, right? I can just sort through a problem without getting too flustered by it, right? I think that's part of it too. Because the other part of critical thinking for me is personally, like, how do I, sometimes I think of critical thinking as detaching from my emotion around a topic a little bit. And is that a good thing or a bad thing? Like, am I really bringing it all if I put my emotions around the topic to the side and just focus on reasons? And is this a good reason? And because so much of it is, I have to acknowledge the feelings I have around that topic first before I can even move into, you know, thinking about are my reasons for believing X good or well-founded. So, I'm looking more at acknowledging the feeling, why I have that feeling around it, and then getting to the critical thinking part, which I don't think I did a whole lot doing my undergrad and graduate work in philosophy, which is kind of bizarre. Like, I remember not really liking my ethics class because I'm like, oh, this is kind of boring. But I think I was just like an avoidance of wanting to have a strong opinion about stuff that really matters and being a little bit afraid to go there.
Interesting.
And with my partner being an ethicist, like, oh, this is an everyday conversation now. You know, I thought he was going to divorce me over pizza because I said I didn't feel like I was obligated to help people. And he was like, what? So it was a larger conversation, but I'm like, this relationship is ending. We've only been married a year. This is it, you know? So
it's funny because it's relatable.
Oh man. And realizing that's important to people and you can't say stuff lightly, right?
Yeah.
But so personally, it's kind of, again, an all day, every day kind of thing. With my kids, it's a little more exciting with my kids. I feel like I'm kind of like trudging through some deep mud at this point with my critical thinking. And for them, it's like, you just made an inference. That's exciting. Like, and why that's exciting, you know? Like, I remember my son when he was 2, he looked at me and he was like, did you take a shower? And I was like, yeah, how did you know that? And he's like, your hair's wet. I'm like, good, yes. Connections. This is nice, using your senses to put things together. Anyway, so with them, it's a lot more exciting about, you know, let's think through things. What's our plan? What do we want the outcome to be? Why might that outcome not happen? Like, what other external factors are going on? And so that part's a little more fun. Lighthearted, I think.
That does sound much more exciting and not uneventful, but unexpected. You know, I don't get to be around children a lot, but that is one of the things that always surprises me, the things that they notice, the things that they are learning just about being human and then like being in environments. It's just like, oh, right. Yeah. You know, things that we just automatically have going on. It's like new for them.
My daughter is really into asking the question of like, so she's 2.5. She's like, where are my eyes? Why can't I see my eyes? Why aren't my eyes moving? And I'm like, your eyes do move. And like, even my son was like, look, Lydia, my eyes are moving when I move my head, or I can just move my eyes by themselves. She's like, but my eyes don't do that. And I'm like, what is happening in that little brain? She's having a freak out right now.
Oh, man. Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm going to go have an existential crisis. No, so two things that one thing that you said, and then something that you reminded me of. So sorting through a problem without getting flustered. I think absolutely, I agree that is an important skill that comes along with good critical thinking, with thinking critically, thinking well. And what is interesting about this that has surprised me the older I get is, well, of course, that is hard for us, but you know, sorting through, moving aside our emotions, like, whoo, catch me on the wrong day. And that's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
But then also there are people who can't hear or don't recognize rational arguments. You can lay it out and say, you know, A plus B and then C, you do that, but they can't hear that. What they can hear are emotions. And that's the piece where it's really like, I'm still kind of stuck there, like what to do with those people, because I don't want to tap back into it. Like, oh, you have to see anger in me in order to believe that I'm angry. And you can't just hear the words that I'm saying and me explaining what led me to anger and how we can lead me out of anger. No, you have to see me flailing my arms and shaking my fists and like my vein popping out on my forehead. So that's
I think it's an odd, I don't know where this like gets created or something, but it's somehow that if you're not conveying emotion, then you don't care. And this is an academic exercise in me challenging your beliefs or something like that. And I think, how do you get to that spot where you're like, no, I'm invested, like this matters to me. I'm just trying to like go about this in a methodical way so we can connect and agree on certain basic statements here, so we have some ground to start on. But if someone needs that emotional display to be convinced that you care about something, that's something.
And actually hearing you say that, like, I'm confounded, absolutely perplexed by this, like in every arena except for romantically, because now hearing you talk, I'm hearing like, this is how my boyfriend is. Like, he will say the things that mean romantic love and stuff, but because there isn't like the affection there, I'm just like, wait, what's going on here? Show me some emotion.
I guess it goes both ways, right?
It totally goes both ways. Oh my God. Which then just very briefly, thinking of, so your episode, this will come out in a couple of weeks, and maybe that firing has happened. But you got me to think of how sometimes we have to do this in breakups. I definitely remember one relationship in particular that I didn't want to be with him anymore, but more importantly, I wanted to make sure that he knew why I didn't want to be with him, because other women weren't going to want to be with him. Like there was something
trying to do the world a solid by explaining things. Yeah.
It's like, no, this is going to be a problem for you. And if you don't recognize it, like this is going to keep happening. And for, can have a whole other like episode on like, is that our responsibility? Do we need to take that on, and the emotional labor and blah, blah, blah. But I truly do believe that we can at least put it out there. If we see it, see something, say something, we can like, do that least bit of one sentence to do the world a solid.
I recognized I had a communication problem. Most of it like with my tone and my smiling while I'm saying something, where people think I'm being light, even if it's like a very serious thing for me, was I had to break up with an ex-boyfriend twice, because the first time it like things didn't connect with like what I was saying and what that meant for us and all of this. And so that was my first, and I think I was like 19, and I'm like, oh, I have a problem here. Like I need to like be solemn and serious sometimes, and like be very pointed and direct. And I'm like, I wasn't like, hey, we're breaking up, it wasn't that, but I was just like, how could I be misconstrued so badly, and have to go through that again, which was rough. But that's I can see like having if you have a really strong disconnect between your words and like what you're conveying, that can be confusing for people. But I didn't think I was that far off, but lo and behold.
Lo and behold. So my final official topic is on existential dilemmas. And so I've decided my question is, do you have any words of wisdom regarding existential dilemmas?
Not wisdom. I think it's probably just like I have them frequently, I think is probably it. But on a good point is like there are a lot of small ones, right? I'm never just like, there's no purpose in my life. Like I don't need to continue. So it's never gotten like that. But like there are these small ones. So I had postpartum depression more so with my daughter than with my son. And so a lot of that was, and I've talked to other women who are, who spent a lot of time in academia and then had kids. And so I don't want to speak for like that whole subset, but I think there's this very strong feeling of like, at least for me, like I was my mind was very valuable to me. And then with hormones and kids and barely being able to like take care of myself for a good chunk of time after having the kids is like, oh my, like, does that even matter anymore? Am I just a milk machine? Am I just, like all of these other things? And like, that was probably the biggest one for me, where it was like, what am I doing here? What's happening? Fortunately I came out of that. So that was good. With some help, but I think since then it's been like smaller things, like, and I try to break it down when I get those feelings of like dread. Is like,
can you give an example of a smaller thing?
So me as a mom, I know that seems big, but it's like, what is my purpose? Like, what do I want to do in my relationship with my kids? And so like breaking it down to a smaller thing of like, it's it's not that I have no purpose there, especially since they're young, but I could see that changing as they get older. Like they're going to be more self-sufficient and be able to make their own macaroni and cheese, thank God. And and stuff like that. And so I can imagine this being a very big problem as they get older. And I think a lot of parents go through that. And that's why we see a lot of like helicopter parenting, even with college students, like parents asking professors questions and stuff. I'm like, no, you're not my student. So like at this early stage where I'm like questioning, like, what is my role as their mom and what does that mean? You know, one of the most important ones is like showing them what healthy love looks like, because I think that can avoid like a whole host of problems. So like making sure I'm showing that in the house. So that's like a very small dilemma that I had, because everything seemed so huge and everything was like on my shoulder. So like, I can't do all that. There's no way I could do all that. So I'm just going to shut down and do nothing was my first impulse. And then it's like, all right, let's break this down and kind of see what's at play here. What do I want that purpose to be? And I think a lot of the avoidance of those dilemmas, I don't want to say avoidance. A lot of the resolution for those dilemmas for me is like just breaking it down in smaller parts and feeling like I get to choose, right? Like I'm not a religious person, but I know there are religious people who will probably listen to this conversation, but I get to choose what that purpose is for myself in my life. And that's empowering and kind of pulls me out of those darker existential moments where things seem overwhelming.
So I'm glad you find that to be a small problem. Just leave it at that. And then two, and this is something that you've said a couple times, the breaking things down into parts, how important that is. You know, of course, if we have a big problem or a smaller problem, that's just really the best way to do it. And I certainly need those reminders. I think we all do, that we can probably make things more manageable if we just don't look at the big picture sometimes. If we just look at what is directly in front of us, what needs to be handled immediately. You know, maybe you just need to make the macaroni and cheese. And then figure out what's next as they're eating it, you know. Sometimes it really is that simple. And that existentially, if we're talking about like, what am I going to do with my day and what does that mean for the rest of my life, like sometimes that can help. Those small wins make us feel better, get us out of that space of like, I can do nothing. So I appreciate that.
This was probably on like one of the many TED Talks I watched or something like that. But the person said, a mistake is not the worst thing you can make. And like, so especially in raising my kids to a certain degree, like with my relationship with Andrew too, it's like, you know, you make the mistake, you own up to the mistake, but you need to move on too, because those things are going to happen. And I think about, you know, when I stopped drinking alcohol, me and my friends called it the post-drunk blues, where like you do some heavy drinking the night before and the next morning you're like, oh, I said some things that were pretty dumb. I probably did a lot of dumb things. Things you regret, I guess is what I mean. And so when I stopped drinking alcohol, it was like a flood of all of those things that like I probably hadn't thought about in like 10 years. And I think part of it for me was like, well, that's in the past. Let's hope we make better decisions in the future and like, let's keep chugging along, right? Because what else are you going to do?
What else are you going to do? You've already recommended a documentary and some other things. Any book recommendations?
I feel like Brene Brown is really popular right now. Like she wrote Daring Greatly and things like that. But just so her research is around shame and vulnerability and courage. And so I think her work for me has been important. Like the vulnerability part, I feel like I'm an oversharer, so that wasn't a huge problem for me. But the lines in her work where people bring up the story I'm telling myself. And like so much of that where I get in my own head and I'm like, oh, this person's thinking this about me. And that can be like the farthest thing from the truth. It may be the truth. I don't know. But like the amount of times I like make up stuff in my head about like really caring too much about what other people are thinking, really, I think is part of it. The balance with that, though, is still caring enough about what other people think to be a decent human being. So it's, there's a balance there.
Like that reminds me, I forget if it's Don Miguel Ruiz in Four Agreements or if it was RuPaul, who said something to the effect of, what other people are thinking is none of my business. It's none of your business. It's none of our business. And so when I have a hard time finding that balance, because you've explained it great, it's perfectly, that's what I go to. It's just none of my business what's going on in their head.
I love that. Yeah, that's really good. I hope it's both people who say that, honestly. Like they're just on the same wavelength, and I really that's think what it is.
You could see both of them saying that.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you would like to share since you have this space?
Oh, no, this was lovely. Highlight of my month, probably, but it's been a bad month, so I don't want to say that.
Yeah. Hopefully things end pretty strong.
Yeah.